Hope you guys can hear me. This morning we're in an early model JK with an LS3 and a 6L80. This Jeep is somewhat halfway to a buggy build. You can see all the lights on the dash. We've got aftermarket seats with 5-point harness. I think we got a 14 bolt in the rear, I'm not sure. But a lot of the stuff in this Jeep is just not functional. Of course, ESP, the airbag, the seatbelt lights on because we don't have proper seatbelt. We have no sway bars in this Jeep, so essentially I'm more of a captain than I am a driver. It sways pretty radically. It's got 3-link suspension front and rear, and if you've ever driven a 3-link suspension without sway bars, you'll know that it rocks like a boat on the ocean, and it can be somewhat concerning. So here's the deal. Other than the powertrain, however your Jeep comes in the shop, that's probably how it's going to leave, unless you want to fix things up. Now, this customer is perfectly happy with the way this Jeep is. He has over 200,000 miles on it, and probably is accustomed to all this stuff not working, because essentially this is an off-road Jeep. This guy's not going to jump in this thing and go 500 miles. So if this is a Jeep you're just going to get in and go out onto the trail and have fun with, that's fine. I can say this, the seatbelt dinger drives me nuts, and it dings for about 15 minutes, I'd say, pretty loudly, and then it stops. So I guess they have a program to stop after a certain amount of time so you don't go crazy. Oh, look at Red Rock, it's pretty cool. Oh, here's a bug car. They rent these out here in Red Rock for the tourists to drive around. One thing this thing does have is acceleration, which it probably didn't have with the 3.8. We at Motec would be really happy if every Jeep that came in was completely stock, not lifted, didn't have aftermarket rock rails and stereos and roof racks and rock lights and cameras and S-pods and air compressors. It would greatly reduce the build time of these builds. But unfortunately, the reality is that guys want and need that stuff, so we have to deal with it. So first let's talk about the seats. The seats are actually part of the airbag system. They have load sensors in them. So if you replace the seats and you don't either plug those sensors in or fool them, which some guys do, they just put a resistor in to fool the system to think the sensor is there, then you're going to have a light on, and it can be very annoying. Usually when a telltale or a malfunction light comes on, it's telling you that that system is disabled or partially disabled. So like with ESP, you can see we got our ABS light on. I know he's got aftermarket axles in this. We don't know what he's done with the tone rings. We don't know what's going on with the ABS module, but we can assume that the ABS isn't working. ESP, or electronic stability program, has a lot of different modes. Brake locking differentials, anti-lock brakes, trailer sway control, brake assisted steering. And the ESP system is dependent on what gear you're in with the transmission and what gear the transfer case is in. So if you're in 2-wheel drive high, most of ESP is active. If you're in 4-wheel drive high, some of the ESP is deactivated. It's called a partial off mode. And then if you go into 4-wheel drive, most guys say that everything is disabled, but I find that it's not. Like brake locking differentials, if you don't have a Rubicon, can actually help you get unstuck. It senses if one wheel is slipping and then transfers power to the other side by braking the slipping wheel. So I think that part of ESP stays active, but most of the rest of it is turned off. And of course some of you guys do the bypass, the dynamic module bypass, where you cut that wire, you put a switch in, and that pretty much kills all of ESP. Running without sway bars can be a scary thing. This is not the first Jeep I've driven without sway bars. They rock and roll, and while disconnecting sway bars gives you more articulation off-road, it reduces stability on-road. That's why vehicles like the Rubicon went to a sway bar disconnect, because it's kind of like a locking differential. You can have an open differential, a fully locked differential, or something in between, like a Positraction or a Torsen or a Detroit locker. The selectable locker is probably the best, because you push a button and your axle is locked. You don't have to depend on cogs or cams and hear clicking, all that. It's locked. Same thing with a sway bar. You got anti-rocks and stock sway bars that you can't disconnect, or you can use links. You can just disconnect your links. But the Rubicon's really nice, and I have an 09 Rubicon with the electronic sway bar, and I've never had any issue with it. I know a lot of guys do. But it's really nice to be able to push a button and unlock that front sway bar. But if you're going 60, 80 miles an hour down the highway and you're going through a sweeping turn, you will appreciate having those sway bars. We got most of the functionality in this Jeep. We don't have cruise and tap shift right now. Well, we kind of do, but the cruise control switch is messed up. So cruise isn't engaging and tap shift is kind of intermittent. So the customer may or may not want to get that function. And if he does, of course, we're going to fix it. I noticed that he has a little switch panel here. I'm not sure if that's the Switch Pros or the Pro Comp or what, but these little credit card ones are really becoming popular, and I like them because put them wherever you want. You don't have a big switch panel up top. It's very convenient. This happens to be an 8-channel, and the power box is really small, and it mounts right on top of the battery with short cables, so we're not running cables across the engine compartment. I've actually seen those heavy cables catch on fire in some JKs wheeling hard out here in the Southwest when the temperatures are triple digit, if there's a lot of current going through them. So this is a nice setup, but you can configure it to do whatever you want: lights, lockers, air compressors, etc. Now again, however the vehicle comes in is most likely how it's going to leave, unless there's something wrong and we fix it. And we noticed that a lot of these S-Pods and Bantams and Pro Comp switch panels are just wired really bad, so we have to rewire them. But roll bars are a good thing if you roll. Personally, I like roll bars that do not obstruct your vision too much. And there's some really large diameter tubes that sit high up on the dashboard and block visibility over the hood. And I really don't like that, because when I'm in close quarters or I've got to see what's right over my front bumper and you got a giant roll bar there blocking your vision, I don't like it. This one does seem to hug pretty tight. In combination with these aftermarket seats, which sit up really high, I can see over the hood. Airbag. Well, the airbag has a lot of components, as you know. It's got the squib on the driver's side and on the passenger side. That's basically the thing that blows and activates the airbag, and there has to be simultaneous inputs from various sensors to get those to go off. A lot of you guys see that squib open code, and that usually means you have a bad airbag clock spring. The clock spring in these JKs have never been that reliable. There's been several updates. One of the updates they did a few years ago wasn't so much for the airbag, but for the dust getting into that cavity and then getting into the airbag clock spring and grinding as you turn the wheel, and then eventually it would fail. So they tried to seal the dust out by putting a lip on the back of the steering wheel and the column cover that would seal that dust out. And boy, what a pain it can be to remove the steering wheel versus the old days where you had big windows to grab the hooks or the bolts. They pretty much removed those openings to seal the dust out, but it made it a lot harder to service and access that. I believe this customer went with an LS3 because it's a really simple engine. Compared to a Hemi or an LT, the LS3 is pretty much as basic as you can get. It doesn't have variable valve timing. It doesn't have active fuel management or 4-cylinder mode. It does have higher compression, about 10.7 to 1 for better performance. The LS3 was actually used in manual transmission vehicles. And a lot of guys don't know this, but the automatic version of the LS3 is the L99. Now the L99 did use active fuel management and variable valve timing. So if you get a 6.2 LS out of a Camaro, you say it's an LS3, technically you're kind of right, but you probably really have an L99 if you had an automatic vehicle. The actual LS3 designed for the manual transmission is somewhat different than the L99. The compression ratio is different. They removed all the parts in it that didn't need to be there. So again, the 4-cylinder mode lifters are gone, the variable valve timing is gone, and it was a higher performance engine. And that's the engine you basically see out there in competition, whether it's circle track racing or Baja or whatever. This LS3 is a 1955 Chevy on steroids. Chevrolet is stating that the LS3 is currently available, but they say that it's a 6-month wait. So that's kind of a dichotomy, but apparently it is still available and we're still doing builds with it. If you do want to do an LS3 build, please get your deposit in early, because the lead times on the LS3 has proven to be many, many months. The Jeep I'm driving is about as unstable as a vehicle I would want to see on the highway. Now, I've had a lot of experience and a lot of years driving, and I've driven all sorts of crazy stuff. So I know when to back off. I know when I go into a turn, the thing is going to lean over like a lobster boat. So I back off the throttle on the turns, and you actually notice that when you get into the throttle, just the torque of the engine can cause the vehicle to roll. So for its intended purpose, I would say this customer got the appropriate engine. Now, if you don't really give a crap about all this stuff, anti-lock brakes and all the amenities, then this is a great build. There's a fine line between this and what I call a buggy build. What's a buggy build? Well, I got guys calling me all the time, hey, can I just buy your module and put it in my Jeep? You know, I bought an engine out of this or that. And the answer is kind of no, because it's all integrated. While we do run factory operating systems and harnesses and modules and all that, the bidirectional bridge that we offer has a small harness that goes between the GM harness and the Jeep system. Kalen is really close to making it 100% plug and play. And when I mean 100% plug and play, I mean 100% plug and play. Our system is running the full power distribution center with all the fuses. We're not just running 1 or 2 fuses. We're running the powertrain relay the way it's intended to, being controlled by the computer and the ASD. We're not only running the factory power distribution center connector, but also the interior connector. So we're making a lot of progress on the 100% plug and play kit. But to give somebody a module and say, here, make it work, that would be difficult without a lot of tech support. So many years ago, some of you might remember, we were offering electrical packages, which basically just came with all the wiring, and you could supply everything else. The engine mounts, the accessory drive, and all that. That would save you a ton of money. We're thinking about doing that again. We might do that closer to spring or summer this year. We finally have production really cranked up and in the wiring department, and we think we can start to support not only for new builds, but for upgrades. Upgrades from the older Motec module and other companies' builds that want to be upgraded to the latest CAN module. Whew. Ahoy, matey. So if we look at a buggy build, and I work with shops that do them, basically you just rip everything out. You don't really care about the original dash working. You don't care about anti-lock brakes working. So you run a digital Dakota dash or a Speed Hut dash or one of those. You put a standalone LS3 harness in, whether it's GM Performance Connecting Cruise or one of the others. And guys, do your diligence on harnesses. Harnesses are the heart of the swap and where most problems arise. We've seen some really cheesy harnesses with Chinese connectors, small gauge wires, poor power distribution and ground distribution. Try to keep it OE if you can. The Chevrolet Connecting Cruise setup's pretty nice. They don't lay out that well. They got just a ton of wires, I think like 4 or 5 feet going to the ECM, so guys can run it inside the cab. But if you don't want to run it inside the cab, then you got to bunch the wire up. But there's a lot of options out there if you want to do a buggy build. So you're pretty much going to lose most of the functionality of the cruise control, air conditioning, anti-lock brakes, dash functions, etc. But if you're just going to take your Jeep out and drive it off-road like a 1976 CJ, then there's nothing wrong with that. Now where it gets a little tricky is when the guys are in between. They don't want to sacrifice certain functionalities, but they want it to be a dedicated off-roader, which essentially this Jeep is. And overall, most everything works. If we get the cruise control switch replaced, we'll have tap shift and cruise control. Air conditioning is working. All the dash functions are working. Now the fact that the lights are on is irrelevant because those systems aren't working. Now we here on Motec, we can turn those lights off electronically because we have full control of the dash, but we don't. And the reason is, if a system is not working, you should know it's not working. And if that light comes on, that light comes on. It's just like when Chrysler does the steering wheel dance. It disables your ESP. You get that annoying dinging and ESP off and brake lights are on and all that to tell you, hey, this system's not working. So we're gonna take this Jeep up to the mountain, which right now is in a cloud, and we'll see you soon.